And our governments need a feedback loop. And if the UK or Canada are going to turn their fortunes around, they need to acknowledge that their best and their brightest can and will and already are leaving.
So welcome back to the NextDay Nomad Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Evanishin, and I'm super excited to bring back a former guest that I had a few months ago. We had such a truthful, raw conversation about the direction of our two countries that we're respectively from and where things are going. And as promised you, I would bring him back. So let's welcome back Alex Napier-Holland. He is currently in Portugal, and I am so excited to have him back on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jared.
Yes, no, I appreciate you coming on, and I know that we've been obviously discussing a lot of things in the past, and where things are going, and you've spoken very publicly about how things are going with the UK, and I speak pretty publicly with how things are looking in Canada. And I mean, since we last spoke, there's been a lot of things that have happened. I mean, obviously, there was the election, obviously the inauguration has now happened and Trump's coming into power, and, he's come out of the gate swinging and, really trying to level out the mess that he was left with over the last 4 years. And then obviously, we see how things have progressed over in the UK. I just want to know, we'll start with the UK because we keep seeing how things are progressing, and I just want to know first and foremost, what's the truth? And maybe you can attest to this. I know you're not living in the UK right now, but is it true that there are people actually being arrested for speaking out against the current administration?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been plenty of documented examples of people for being arrested for minor social media posts. Some social media posts that were probably a bit spicy, like inciting violence, that I definitely would not support or agree with. But equally, you look at the sentences handed out, 3-year sentences in some cases. You can try and argue and defend that all you like, but when you then have, the same judge, for example, who's been identified giving non-custodial sentences to pedophiles, you can tell me, for example, let's say you live in a society like Singapore. Singapore is a country that has fairly harsh penalties across the board. You might get imprisoned for inciting violence for 3 years in Singapore, but equally, if you're caught with child abuse material, that kind of stuff, you're going away for longer. At least the calibration might be higher, but at least it makes sense. And you get ultra-liberal countries. What doesn't make sense in the UK, it's not just the severity of a punishment for the incitement to violence, but how incredibly lax and weak the UK is when it comes to tackling stuff like antisocial behavior, sex offenders, stuff that actually matters, stuff that when you actually poll the general population, nobody wants to see people who engage in antisocial violence walking away without being punished. So the sentences being handed out by judges are in no way reflective of the will of certainly most decent working people. It's the contrast I think you have to take into account with how weak the UK is on law and order. That makes those sentences for people posting spicy stuff on social media even more outrageous, I would say.
Which is actually insane when you think about this, because we've had our own problems in Canada. And you mentioned Singapore, and I haven't been yet. I'm actually going next month. In about a month, I'm going to be going to Singapore for a few days. And I mean, I'm currently in Vietnam, and they've got harsh penalties here.
Yeah.
But one thing that I noticed is that there's no crime. I don't see any crime. I've yet to see like an argument or a fight or anything like that, or even theft for that matter, because I think the penalties are so harsh that people are afraid to see what those penalties are. And there's a lot of tourists here and there's a lot of expats, but I think people respect the law. And I think law is made to do that, to give you peace, give you order, and, also help you kind of give that peace of mind that you are safe. And if you look at the US over the last 4 years, we won't speak to what the next 4 years are going to look like, but then Canada over the last 9, and then the UK, there's been a huge amount of violence that have gone on in the last, let's just say half a decade to a decade, where things have gotten so bad. And I don't necessarily think that it is true citizens of Canada that are inciting that violence. they might have, yes, they might have something to do with a small portion of it, but I think they're also fighting back for what they believe in and what where I feel like their countries have respectively have been taken away from them. And I think that you look at Dubai as well. I mean, you could leave a $30,000 handbag on a table in a restaurant for 4 hours, and that handbag will sit there and nobody will touch it because the penalty is so harsh. Now, in Canada, you could rob, you could break into 31 cars and steal a bunch of stuff, maybe go on but you're going to be out on bail within like 4 days, and you're going to be out as an offender doing the same thing. And same thing with sex offenders and pedophiles. There's so much leniency, and I don't know if it's because our justice system is filled to the brink with with prisoners, but it just seems like we're just going in a backward society where we're punishing the wrong people for harsher penalties than what it is to actually keep our people safe. And I'm curious to know like how things are really progressing in the UK, because I've heard a lot of the things about the rape gangs and all this kind of stuff, and they're getting off on like really minuscule penalties.
I'd actually slightly disagree in the sense that I think law and order is a factor, and I put that forward previously,
Yeah.
but I think there's a bigger one, which is the complete breakdown in social fabric in terms of feeling like you live in a society where hard work is rewarded. And I think the irony
Yes.
is that, I think the left have caused this. I think the left have created an ultra permissive society in which you can not just, you can contribute nothing, do no work,
Yes.
um, barely support your own family, let alone contribute to society more broadly, and the state will just effectively wipe your ass for you, for want of a better expression. I think a lot of his antisocial behavior is caused by this ultra permissive environment in which people expect welfare, people expect handouts. And if you're a parent, for example, you understand the most important thing for your child to understand is cause and effect. I was quite a mischievous teenager. I got into a bit of trouble with the law when I was a kid, when I was like 15, 16. And then I walked into a Muay Thai gym at 18, and that changed my entire life. Because you walk into a Muay
Hmm.
Thai gym or a boxing gym or MMA, and you suddenly understand, A, fuck around and find out. There are much bigger people there than you who, if you have a bit of an attitude, will sort it out for you. But more importantly, the association between hard work and reward. The Muay Thai gym was the first place where I discovered that if you work hard at something, you get something back. And if you don't work hard, you don't. And that cause and effect is crucial. And then you apply that to business, you apply that to fitness, you apply it to relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, the
Hmm.
capacity to tolerate discomfort. All of the nice things people like you and me have, that nice lifestyle we have, the beach, that's all a direct outcome of discomfort. You're not on a beach working on a sunny beach because you bought a plane flight. You're there because of the time that you spend at your computer doing, we're both from sales backgrounds, making phone calls that feel uncomfortable,
Yes.
doing work, sending emails that require intelligence, pushing through and working when you feel tired. And that association between those two things is broken down in the UK. I mean, if I can give you an example, I bought at the age of 28, which is 11 years ago now. I bought an apartment. I worked hard. I worked in corporate tech. I bought a £330,000 apartment, like the thick end of probably, I don't know the exchange rate, 450 Canadian probably. And I
Yeah.
busted my balls to buy this apartment. I worked hard. I had to get the deposit. I had to get the salary in a nice upmarket area of central Cambridge, like a nice one of the top three cities in the UK, probably like Toronto, something like that.
Yeah.
I get this apartment, and there's 4 blocks of apartments, and the fourth block, 20 to 25% is always given away as social housing. So I've got my apartment I've busted my balls to get. There is an identical block next to us that are given away, and there are some nice people in there. But there's also a bunch of violent drug addicts, drug dealers, people who are given £300,000 to £400,000 apartments that are selling drugs off the balconies. One of my friends, who is a hairdresser who works very hard, she had to leave Cambridge. She comes to my house for a coffee, and she's looking out the window saying, hang on a second, I had to leave Cambridge to buy an apartment, and these drug addicts and criminals are given apartments I could only dream of affording for free. And the amount of antisocial behavior we had from these people, they were by far and away the most badly behaved people in the area. And it's just this culture in which people are just given things for free. We now have a motability scheme in the UK. I've got ADHD. I've got dyslexia, ADHD. If I wanted to, as a British citizen, I could say I need to get a special vehicle for myself because I have a learning difficulty. Is that like some kind of like mobility scooter? No, it's a Mercedes SUV. The Motability scheme in the UK in the last 5 years has grown from 4 billion to 7 billion pounds. You could get diagnosed with some minor ailment and you can get a Mercedes SUV provided by the government. That's a kind of insane culture we have. And then you occasionally tell these people, no, you can't have that thing. You might have to work for it. They fly off the handle and break something. It's just we've raised a whole culture of big babies that have no emotional resilience, no capacity to work, and we're surprised they're misbehaving.
And that's true too. And like it's the same thing over here in Canada. I mean, we spent $1 billion on immigrant housing and putting them up in 5-star hotels when they came into Canada. And, those hotel rooms are costing anywhere from 300 to, let's just say in pounds wise, I'd say that it's costing anywhere from like 250 to 450 pounds per night. And some people in Canada, the hardworking individual, would only dream about going to spend, a weekend away at the Fairmont and spending their whole paycheck having to do so. And we bring in people into our country. We spend $1 billion housing, immigrants across the country. Now, I'm not going to say I'm against immigration. I'm just thinking that we got to level the playing field because we're giving people who have never really contributed anything to our country and giving them all this like free passes because and it's the same thing with Ireland. My wife is Irish and we talk about this as well that the Ukrainians that have fled the war, which we can get into that or not get into that, but they have been given free housing. The students have been given free housing and free education plus 1,600 euros per month. And now that's caused a ripple effect for people wanting to get into school that are Irish citizens, plus find considerable cheap housing in the university towns. And it's leaving them with a massive rental crisis because there's nothing available because immigration has taken up all of their local real estate. So, and I think it's the same thing across most Western countries that we're just giving these handouts to people and they're taking advantage of it. And I can guarantee you most of that money is going back to their home countries where it's not going into our local economy, but it's kind of like a snowball effect and we're not taking care of our own. And I do agree with everything that you said because all these handouts, and I think it started in COVID when we've talked about this, I think last time about how, we're giving, I think in Canada, we were giving away people $2,000 a month. So like maybe like 1,500 pounds a month to residents in Canada who were affected by the pandemic, and it created this whole laziness where people were having a hard time going back to work because they just got complacent doing nothing and making money for doing nothing, even though it wasn't a lot. But I mean, it just creates a form of laziness that you can just show up, wake up, do nothing, and the government's going to take care of you. And I feel like the government's designing this system so you can and like we said last time, kill innovation, because now you're going to create a society where you rely on all these things. And for someone like you and I, who have chosen to live, in a nicer location, live on the beach, kind of enjoy our slow mornings, do what we want to do, it's also making us realize that it's not safe to live where we are because it's created this absolute shitstorm of I don't want to say unintelligent people. They could be intelligent people to certain people, but I think it's just created this whole nonsense where people are just, I want more, and it's causing up the prices for everybody who's actually working because our taxes are going up to fund that.
You've got to be realistic as well. And if I'm actually very pro immigration, very pro, but it should be
Yes, I
objective.
agree.
There are a ton of talented, interesting people across the world who can and should be welcomed into Canada and the UK. But we need to have some sort of a way of grading and saying, are you an engineer? Are you a nurse, for example? Are you a qualified
Yes.
teacher? Do you speak enough? Do you speak the local language to a high enough proficiency? One of the things I don't think people kind of clock is that the so-called kind left, they're kind of screwing these people over. Because if you take in a bunch of people from a country that has a very low level of economic development, and look, Afghanistan is going to have some doctors and nurses, but they're not going to be a high percentage of a population. I mean, anyone who's got an IQ higher than a potato understands that there is a link between economic development and the percentage of people who will have high skilled jobs that can contribute to an economy. Is it kind to welcome over people from a very poorly developed economy who simply don't have the skills to participate in Canadian society, who do not have the skills to participate in UK society? That's not kind. That's not helpful. You're not giving them a better life. You're throwing them into an environment where they don't know how to operate. They don't know how to participate. The problem is these people aren't kind. They're people who operate from a completely self-indulgent, childlike state in which doing things that makes me feel warm and fuzzy makes them feel good. I mean, I once spent some time talking to a lady who ran a charity for homeless people. And she said to me, she was a former homeless person herself, and she said, please, if you do one thing, never give money to homeless people. If you care about homeless people, donate money to homeless shelters, because they can actually use that money to pay for food and pay for beds. She herself told me, if I wasn't given so much money by people on the street, I'd have sorted my life out faster. If you're part of being kind and part of having a good impact in this world is applying the intelligence to try and solve problems. I'm the kind of person who just gives money to a homeless person, and they don't do it to help. They do it because it makes them feel warm and fuzzy inside. That's a selfish action. That's not altruistic. You're not doing it to help them. You're doing it to make yourself feel good. And people who campaign for open borders policies, they're not doing this because they've actually spent any time and effort researching any of the economics and working out that this is a good idea. They're just saying things to make themselves feel warm and fuzzy. It's like the whole, a lot of the DEI stuff is just people who don't think about any of these topics at any level. And the reality that I think the miscalculation the government's made is that people like you and I have to take it on the chin, and we just don't. I mean, the UK now is losing, they're saying £3 billion a year already to digital nomads, because people like us are just saying we don't have to be here, we can up and leave. And the governments have effectively got a monopoly, think they have a monopoly on us. They can just crank up the taxes and people will hang around. The UK lost more wealthy people than any country on planet Earth last year, apart from China. And obviously, China's got a vastly larger population. So on a per capita basis, the percentage of wealthy people living in the UK is off the charts. The number one recipient of those people is Dubai. You and I, $100,000 a year income, you can fly to Dubai, fill in your visa online. I think you get it back in a week or two, fly to Dubai. Bang, you've got 0% income tax. You have a fundamentally safer place in the UK. I'm not a big fan of Dubai personally, but I get it. And particularly for families as well, when it's that safe. I consider it a moral obligation for me to make sure that my future kids don't grow up in the UK. It is a violent place with serious antisocial behavior issues. And I would not rest well. I would not sleep well at night knowing I had failed to remove my children from that environment. I would never raise children in the UK now.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about Canada. Like our mission is to figure out, we're traveling right now and we're trying to decide where we want to raise our future kids, because for the exact reasons. And I will say too, just to touch base on your point, I am also for immigration, but let's make the immigration make sense.
Yeah.
Last year, I don't know the exact numbers. I'm gonna shoot some numbers out for I think what I remember, but there was a lot of immigrants from East India, from India, I should say, that have come to Canada on a education visa. And I want to say it's something like 25 to 40% of those students did not attend one class and went into trucker school and now are working on the trucking roads of Canada, which is taking a lot of positions away from, the blue collar Canadians that have my family comes from the trucking world, and they work for cheaper. They don't follow a lot of the laws. And it's created a lot of chaos. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody that is East Indian that's a trucker falls into that category, because that is not at all the case. But when you come on a specific visa and you do not go to school for the school that you have applied for, you need to be 100% removed from the country. That is not why you're here. And I also think too that Canada doesn't make it easy for doctors or nurses or lawyers who have gone to school in, you know, such said countries to be able to practice their field of their professional field in Canada. My mom works in healthcare, and she has learned that so many people are working as healthcare aides from those said countries because Canada won't recognize their degree as a nurse, as a registered nurse or a licensed practical nurse, which now they're working as a healthcare aide, which is a much, much lower in demand job, which we are needing nurses and lawyers or licensed practical nurses, registered nurses, and doctors. But we make it so much more difficult to recognize their true skills and their true potential, which then takes jobs away from the blue collar people, which then creates more of a dominoes effect because we need those people and those jobs are majority Canadians. And if we're bringing in skilled workers, let's bring in the skilled workers who can do the jobs that we desperately need to be filled, which is the lawyers, the doctors, the nurses, etc. So I think that Canada's just doing it backwards. And I think that we just need to kind of go back. And I also agree with you too. Like we don't want to live in this country. We don't want to raise our kids in this country because there's no jobs for anybody. Like I don't know if you've heard of Tim Hortons or any of
Yep.
the let's use Tim Hortons in Canada is like it's a Canadian staple of a coffee shop. It's like McDonald's, you know, drive through, go get your coffee, you drive off. But that job would be normally in the mornings, or sorry, in the evenings and on weekends would be filled with high school students. Now you cannot get a job as a high school student in Canada working at Tim Hortons, which would be a normal job for like a high school student for their first job, because a lot of immigration has taken up those jobs. They work 3 to 4 jobs to pay for, you know, the expense of living in Canada. And now that teenager who's trying to get into the job market, get into the job force to learn, you know, discipline and responsibility, they can't get jobs because the government of Canada has subsidized income that if you hire so many foreign workers, we will pay for X amount of wages. And so it's just created this whole snowball effect where it's affecting normal citizens. And I don't want to say that, like, you know, everybody that is, you know, that might look like a foreigner in those Tim Hortonses is a foreigner. They are citizens. We have a multicultural,
Yep.
population. But I definitely want to say that there definitely is a lot of people that are temporary workers that are working those jobs and taking jobs away from hardworking Canadians.
Well, the irony in all of it is actually, and it's funny because I'm sure you, like me, you and I both spend a lot of time working and living abroad. I've lived in third world countries. I happen to be in a mixed race relationship myself. Like, we have actually been out there and experienced the world a lot more than a lot of people on the left we're talking about. The amount of times
Mm-hmm.
I've had some person on my left, a white person on my left, who has never left their home country, who has never actually experienced any of these places, trying to lecture me on these topics. I just find it incredible. But the interesting thing is actually a lot of legitimate immigrants are the people who are most vocal against illegal immigration. You look at a lot of the
100%.
debates in America, a lot of Mexicans, for example, who came through the right channels, came into America legally, legitimately, demonstrated a willingness to participate in American society, to pay their taxes, to contribute, and are fully fledged American citizens, are the loudest voices against illegal immigration from Mexico. And you see this again and again. You know, what the left and what the far left and the far right both do. The mistake they both fall into is to discuss immigration in homogenous terms. The right are just blanket anti-immigration. They're racist. They think any immigrants are bad. The left basically do the same thing, which is to say all immigrants are good and wonderful people. And those of us in the middle are saying, hang on a second here, this is just really stupid. There's a lot of people wanting to come into our country from a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
countries. Some of them are really talented and hardworking and good people, and we should welcome them in. Some of them don't want to contribute and want to siphon and send money back. And there's a smaller percentage, again, who actually want to harm us. We need a good vetting system to make sure the right people come in for their benefit, for our benefit. And that's people like you and me. And people on the right think we're soft and left, and people on the left think we're too harsh. And we're just saying, let's be sensible here,
Exactly.
let's be intelligent. And we want the right people to come in. I think immigration is very positive. American society has been built on, and still is built on, recruiting and attracting the best and brightest to come to America. Google's CEO, Microsoft CEO, both from India, for example. Satya
Exactly.
Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, who's done a phenomenal job turning Microsoft around, leading it to record profits. Some of the best, brightest talent in America comes from India as well. So incredible contributions. We're just saying, let's have more of that. Let's have more people who want to come into our
100%.
countries, who want to contribute and play ball.
I agree. And like I work in the recruitment space, so I interview a lot of people from that are in the United States from India that have come over on scholarships to go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Like I've interviewed a lot of people, software engineers, that they're some of the smartest people I've ever talked to, and they have every right to stay to work in the United States or Canada or the UK because their intelligence, they're a part of the top 1%, probably smartest people in the world when it comes to their field. So yes, let's bring those people in because America and the Western world is driving, should be driving innovation to make the world a better place and advance things at a rapid rate to kind of coincide with how fast our population is growing to make things easier for everybody. So we need those people. You can't use all American or Canadian or UK workers to drive the innovation. You do need a lot more people, and immigration does bring those people in. So I'm not, I want to make sure that people know that I'm not against immigration. I'm just against, bringing just anybody in. Like, hey, you know what? You can come to Canada, you can do this job. No, let's bring in the best of the best, and let's reward these people for coming here and actually contributing to our society. With that being said, I also want to lead into um, the Harvard issue that I had just read, just a few days ago, that 25% of MBA students are fail at Harvard University, and we're talking like creme de la creme, are having a hard time finding work coming out of their degree. And I think this report goes back to about 2022. So grads from 2022, 25% of them are still trying to find work. Now, do I think that this is a knock on Harvard? I don't know. I mean, is it a knock on the US economy? It could be. It could be a mixture of both things. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. And I know we talked a little bit about the education system on the last podcast, but this is pretty worrisome when you think of like top students coming from a top university, business school in the United States that are now 3 years in and still can't find a job.
Yeah, so as a bit of background, I spent my 20s in education technology. So I got expelled from two schools as a teenager. I had a pretty patchy record myself, and I somehow ended up advising elite universities on their digital learning strategies, which is kind of a funny curveball. So I spent a lot of time on campuses in the UK, in particular, meeting hundreds of academics across business schools, schools of science as well. So I'd like to think my perspective on this is shaped by being both spending time on campus and also, working in international business a lot. And I mentor quite a few younger people. And the disconnect between what the market wants and what universities are pumping out has always been significant. It's become much bigger. The marketplace has shifted heavily, and universities just haven't caught up. And somebody having a certain level of technical aptitude in a given field is only part of the equation versus the capacity to jump into a team with constantly moving parts and to quickly find problems to solve, to be proactive about finding those problems. And I mean, essentially, the whole point of the education system for me should be the appetite for finding problems out there proactively and building solutions to solve them. And what the education system teaches is just to perform rote functions. I've spoken to multiple founders who've told me, I mean, for example, one of my friends who owns a really high-end design studio in the UK, industrial design. and he's getting in interns who've got, top 1% degrees, first with distinction in industrial design. And they say, what should I do? And he gives them a list of tasks. They complete the tasks. And then they say, what should I do now? And he has to find another list of tasks. And what he wants them to do is jump in and get their hands dirty, pull apart the process, see what's being done, come up with their own solutions. I mean, for example, one of my friends, who's a former business partner of mine now, he's a year younger than me. He went to, like me, he went to a middle tier university, not a good uni at all. But he got an internship for a Swiss company. And this company were basically manufacturing goods in it was in the Far East, basically. And they were shipping these goods. No, it was in the Middle East. Sorry, they were shipping these manufactured goods around the Horn of Africa. And my friend went in as an intern, did all of his own research, and came back and said, he's quite bullish. He basically said, "You're a bunch of idiots. Why are you shipping these goods around the Horn of Africa? You could do this whole trip. You could ship these manufactured goods overland through Europe." And they were like, "Why the hell would we do that?" And he said, "Because it will save you 500,000 Swiss francs on this particular contract." He'd gone and done all the sums. He presents them with his solution, and they were like, "Right, you're hired." He's not even finished his degree, but they were just like, "We want this guy on our team," because he goes in, he sees these people operating this particular process. He comes up with his own way of doing it, and they don't even ask his degree. They just want to hire the guy. And it's that kind of proactivity that companies are looking for. And unfortunately, this desire to get hired and trained on the job, and I'm going to go in as a junior designer, junior developer, I'm going to get 6 months of training, like, just get out of here. Like, that's just not happening.
Mhm.
And you're seeing young people who've on paper got very good degrees, but they're really lacking in terms of social skills and drive.
Yeah.
And I mean, I came into my career, started in journalism, and my mentor for journalism, who was a top UK journalist, taught me, you're going to find the news editor, you're going to stalk him, you're going to run where he goes running in the park, you're going to find out where he goes for drinks, you're going to be a nuisance to this person until he hires you. That was the kind of training I had, and I mentor younger people now. And honestly, I would say within 10 seconds of talking to somebody, I can get a pretty good take on whether or not they're going to make it. You just pick up on a certain degree of, honestly, I'd use the word aggression, just this kind of aggression, like how
Mhm.
badly, and they'll ask me, do you think I can do it? And it's like, do you want it? How much do you really want it? And there's a lot of people who they'll put a lot of work into getting a 3 or 4 year degree, but you tell them, get the fuck out there and pitch yourself. Go and pitch somebody, go and tell them why they should hire you. And they don't want to do it. And I just cannot get my head around why you would put that much work into your studies, but you won't go and cold call somebody, doorstop them, tell them why they should hire you, and they're just mailing out CVs. They're mailing out 300 CVs. If you mail out 300 CVs, I can guarantee you will never get hired. Like, you need to be making these kind of personalized approaches, finding some kind of way to stand out in the pile.
100%. And I think it goes back to personal branding. I
Yeah.
think personal branding now is like one of the most important things you can do as a young person, or actually not even just a young person. I think anybody. I think now you have to provide a value. You have to provide value to something. So if you're applying for a job, like, you're just like everybody else. But if you go into your interview and you have a personal brand and a voice and you're acting like a thought, maybe not acting like a thought, you are a thought leader. You could be acting as a thought leader, but showing them that you have the initiative to make change in the field that you're working in. So whether it is, if it's niche, so if you're marketing and you're working with a specific type of marketing on a specific type of field, become a thought leader in that field. Personal brand yourself, write little documents, write reports, become vocal on social media, whether that's Twitter, or X, I should say, or LinkedIn or Instagram Live, but really try to build yourself an audience, because then people listen, people have respect for you, and people want those type of people working in their with their organizations, because now that person is thinking outside the box and driving the needle, which leads me to my next point, is people with degrees have created workers, because it's like you go get a college education, you're going to get a good job. But if you look at the most wealthiest people in the world, and let's just say, like, That don't have to even be a billionaire, even just like the millionaires in the world that run multi-million dollar companies, and they could be small companies. But why are they successful? Because they think outside the box. They're the people that have always challenged the teacher in school. Because if the teacher was that smart, the teacher would be making $1 million a year and not being teaching you in your classroom. So these people challenge the narrative. They push things forward and they don't take no for an answer. And if they don't like what they hear, they push back and they speak their mind and they find another way outside the box to do it, and which creates innovative thinkers. And that's why I think a lot of people, like you look at Grant Cardone and a lot of other, reputable, self-made people in the world, they've all dropped out of university. Bill Gates dropped out of university because of that exact reason, because they were too smart to be able to be confined to those four walls to a curriculum that is just going to breed mice spinning around a hamster wheel. And I think that ultimately they never find their way out of the maze. And that's where I think the younger generation has really started to understand that. And, you know, I think also too, going back to the Harvard thing, I think a lot of it could be also part of the DEI initiative. They were a school. I don't know what they're like now, but they were a school that was very focused on, bringing in the DEI,
Yeah.
students. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it, because now you look at where the US is going, they're kind of scrapping all of those DEI initiatives. And let's go back to hiring the best people and not hiring just based on, you know, um, your sex, race, and get rid of, go back to hiring on real merit that actually will actually push the needle forward and make, continuous change to specific industries.
I mean, I don't know if you saw it just a few weeks ago. It was interesting timing. I don't think it was in any way because of a Trump administration, because this study had happened before. But just a few weeks ago, a study came out demonstrating that DEI initiatives increase hostility in the workplace and have a negative impact on racial cohesion. And you actually look in America, and correlation does not equal causation, but it is interesting that the rise of DEI initiatives correlates perfectly in America with a massive decline in race relations. The very best thing,
That's interesting.
the very most generous thing you could say is, even if DEI isn't the cause of that, it certainly isn't helping to fix it. Um, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not actually I've got my own issues with Trump. My biggest issues with Trump are I don't believe in trade nationalism. I believe in free trade. Um,
Yes,
I
me too.
I'm also quite pro environmentalism. That's why most of my friends are conservatives. I'm quite green, more than most of them. That's fine. It's like a difference of opinion. My biggest issue. So when it comes to Trump, though, the reduction of DEI stuff had to happen, and it's just the left could have done that. Even if you take an anti-Trump stance, you have to acknowledge the left put him in power. The Democrats just left a
Yes.
clear open goal, and anyone could have popped that ball in the back of a net. The amount of policies in American society that were completely out of step with the average person, the total lack of support for DEI in the general American population, the Democrats, and you have the same problem in certainly American and British society, which is that our leftist movements that were once meant to be grassroots working class movements are now dominated by left-wing people from incredibly privileged and comfortable backgrounds and lifestyles. You've probably encountered the idea of Rob Henderson's idea of we've got a mental block here as well. Talk luxury beliefs, the idea of luxury beliefs.
Yes.
So we because of the relative decrease in the cost of consumer goods. We used to flash status, wearing things like fancy watches and top hats and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And because of a decline of the cost of consumer goods relative to income, it's quite hard to signal. You could be on a low income now and drive a really nice car if you want to be an idiot and lease it. How do you really signal social status? You do it by demonstrating and expressing respect for lofty philosophical ideals that you won't actually be affected by, like supporting mass immigration, for example, knowing you live in a gated community where none of this stuff will affect you, like advocating for DEI policies, knowing you have family wealth and don't need to worry about any of this stuff because you're going to get a job at your dad's place anyway, for example. And,
Hmm.
you actually look at, if you take a group of people and you make it easier for them to get into university, for example, the actual outcome is less people actually, DEI initiatives have actually decreased the percentage of people graduating university because people end up at the wrong university relative to their skill level. And they end up being more likely to fail the university course as a result.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And I think too, when you look at the privileged people who are running for office, let's just look at Mark Carney, who is our new unelected, and I should make that very clear. He's unelected. He was selected because Trudeau resigned, and the Liberal Party had put him into power, which he had received a total of 121,000 votes throughout our country because it was only through politicians and donors and whatnot. So he's an unelected prime minister of our country, but he's also one of the most privileged people in our country. Um, he has ran one of obviously he was the governor of the Bank of England back during 2008 to 2013. I want to say maybe it was 2006. He was there during Brexit. Um, and he's also was the governor of Brookfield. He was the chairman of Brookfield Investments, which has been listed as the number one tax dodger in Canadian history. So he works for a company that has dodged taxes, and yet he's now pushing his tax scheme and how we should be paying more taxes in Canada. But it doesn't really matter to him because he comes from such a privileged society and a privileged upbringing that no matter what policies he puts into place or his administration puts into place, there's no way that anybody in his hierarchy of his family are ever going to be affected. um, and I just found too over the last 4 years, especially the last 4 years since the pandemic, everything that the left in Canada and the United States has pushed has always been rules for thee but not for me.
Yep.
They can get away with scandals, and I mean we could go through. I mean I've got listed here about 50 different scandals that the Trudeau government has been accused of, and nothing has been done about it because they pretty much own the Canadian media, so they can get away with anything, and the media doesn't ever push back on it, and nothing will ever get done about it because we live in such a strict socialist society, and people don't think it's strict, but you literally can't say anything about anything because then nobody you kind of get labeled as a white supremacist or a racist or whatever it is that they want to throw at you. And so we can look back at privileged people, but they get put into situations where they use race and all these other things and white supremacy, and they hide behind that they're doing it for DE and I, and that if you speak out against it, then you're the culprit, not them.
I mean, one of the interesting examples of that, if you look at defund police initiatives in America,
Yes,
those were overwhelmingly rejected by Black communities. If you actually look at
100%.
any of the polling data for those, Black communities widely rejected defund the police initiatives. The support for those initiatives was from wealthy upper class white communities. And I'm not saying that there isn't a problem with policing in America, that that Black people might have some grievances, but I think their understanding, that as I read it, was there are problems, but we'd rather have police than not have police. And yeah, the support for these initiatives is very much coming from upper middle class white people who feel they know better than these communities as to what kind of policies would benefit them. I mean, for example, we had in the UK when we saw, we had our 2016 Brexit referendum, which is positioned by the left as being a demonstrative of, the UK's issue of bigotry. And I'd actually agree with them on that. The difference is that I think it was a different kind of bigotry. The bigotry that the 2016 Brexit referendum revealed to us was a bigotry of upper middle class lefties who essentially hate working class people and think ordinary working class people are stupid, disobedient little pets of theirs that should not be given the right to vote. They talk about, giving people more agency, giving people more chance to express themselves. We then have a vote on a referendum, and the left absolutely decry them and refer to them as being low information, which is to say poorly educated. I mean, I happen to be from Cambridge, which is the hub of. Cambridge is probably the worst city in the UK for sort of this upper middle class
Hmm.
leftism, and I mean, I find these people absolutely nauseating. They don't spend any time with people from any of these communities at all. And they just talk about them as if they are, yeah, some kind of weird disobedient pet. But there's always been this simmering sort of contempt among the UK Labour voters in particular. I mean, there was Emily Thornberry. She was a wealthy UK Labour politician who just a few years ago took a picture of in Canada, you probably have men driving trucks is like your iconic symbol. We have
Yes.
men driving white vans, people who work in laboring jobs, people who work on building
Yes.
sites. We have white vans. And she took Emily Thornberry, this Labour MP, takes a picture of a house with a white van outside and a St. George's cross, which is a traditional English flag, and uploads it to Twitter with some sort of comment along the lines of "This is everything that's wrong with the UK." You are an MP for the Labour Party, the party of Labour. It means the
Yeah.
same thing in here as it does in Canada, as it does in Australia. The party for ordinary people. And you are mocking somebody who has a white work van and feels sufficiently proud of his country that he wants to fly a flag. Are you kidding me? Like, the level of cognitive dissonance, like, I just wonder who these people hang out with. Like, I'm proud to say, more than anything in this world, I have friends who call me out my bullshit all the time. When I say something stupid or I contradict myself,
Mm-hmm.
they say, "You said this last week. How the fuck do these two things line up?" Can you imagine the kind of people that these people hang out with if they get to work for Labour Party and publicly mock working people, and there's no one in their circles who says, "Why the fuck are you in our party?" Like,
Yeah.
these people are just sociopaths, absolute sociopaths.
I don't actually understand, like, and maybe you could give me like give a thought on this. Like, what is really in it for the socialist people? They want to create this world, or this identity of what they actually believe in. But you look at, like, let's go back to the people in Cambridge, like you said, it's like more upper middle class, upper class people who are, that are more on the socialist side. But what is actually in it for them to be a socialist when they live this such privileged life? Like, what does it actually do for them? And I try very hard to understand why somebody would want to be part of a socialist movement when you are wealthy, compared to being in a conservative movement, or a libertarian movement where you can ultimately maybe pay less taxes, or all these other things. Like, I actually don't understand the difference in correlation between those two.
We've got to break this down, and you could break down the type of people who vote for socialist policies in a developed country like the UK into countless groups. But two simple groups would be people who would actually benefit from a society that has better public services, for example, and would supposedly be the benefactors of welfare schemes, and then the people, the upper classes, who clearly don't need these things and are pushing them. Socialism in any kind of credible form is obviously dead. We know, for example, that Marxist regimes are responsible for more than 100 million deaths last century. It's failed. Full-blown socialism has failed in every single place that we've tried it.
Yes.
But I think it's also failed more profoundly than that, in the sense that capitalism is, without any shadow of a doubt, the best economic system we have so far. We have proven that if you want to elevate people from poverty, you have to give people the tools to help themselves. And that people need the tools, not just literally, not physically, but intellectually as well. They need skills in order to build things, to make things. We need free trade. And in that sense, people who advocate for Marxist regimes, I think they all know they failed. They all know that capitalism clearly works a lot better. I think the people at the top who are advocating for socialist policies in the UK, they're in such an elite position. They don't need to worry about any of the negative implications of this. A lot of the people advocating for, say, libertarian policies, um, for example, for better conditions for businesses to flourish, are often people who pull themselves up by the bootstraps. They might be worth £5 or £10 million, but they grew up in a working class home, and they saw
Mm-hmm.
themselves the importance of hard work, of taking risks, of building things, of engaging in commerce, and they've got themselves to a good place now, but they've got enough memory of what it was like to be at the bottom. They pull their bootstraps up. They've got there, and they know that we need more business, more entrepreneurship in order for other people to get ahead. The kind of people who are advocating for a lot of the socialist policies are from extreme generational wealth. They've never built anything. They've inherited.
Mm-hmm.
They are completely insulated from any of these policies. They have either A, so much money they can afford to pay more tax, or B, in most cases, have complex offshore setups, so they aren't actually affected. And the difference between someone who's got £3 or £4 million in the bank, that's somebody who can barely afford to be offshore in any meaningful way anyway, at least if they've got a UK-based business. The kind of people who are pushing for sort of socialist policies a lot of the time are from ultra wealthy backgrounds. They've got entities in the Cayman Islands and so forth, and they will never have to worry about money ever again. They're pushing for these policies because it elevates them socially. When you don't have to worry about paying any of your bills anymore, what does your currency become? If you look at most billionaires, for example, their currency becomes the idea of dynasty, of creating ideas, of
Yeah.
building things that go long beyond your time on Earth here. And you could build an international business that might have some kind of great social impact. The problem is that's hard. If you just sit in a gilded castle with your wealth and just fawn over and talk about policies that benefit working class people, it's one of the easiest, lowest effort ways out there for you to elevate yourself above billionaires. It's just so vacuous and so clearly an example of just low effort status pumping, essentially. And there's this huge disconnect between these people who are pushing these policies and people at the top, at the bottom, who are not actually going to benefit from these policies in many cases. You have one other third group in the middle, which is sort of a student activist types who
Mm-hmm.
are often of at least average intelligence. But I think in many cases, the rise of leftism amongst young people, I think, comes down to people who potentially have at least a moderate IQ, but just don't have the character qualities. They don't have a grit. They don't have a determination. They don't really want to work. They don't really want to build things. They're used to life, things being handed to them on a plate. They're starting to realize the real world of work is actually quite tough and scary. And they just essentially, particularly with the whole point of university is to get young people ready for real world. Universities become a place that insulates people from the real world. You're here.
Mm-hmm.
Life is here. You have to get this set of steps in between, which is what university is meant to become. University doesn't do that. In fact, many people enter university now and leave university less capable when they went in.
Yes.
They are more vulnerable. They are more emotionally damaged, and they are worse at tackling life than they were before they went into university 3 years ago. Are we surprised in any way they gravitate towards political ideologies that promise to give them life on a plate and they don't have to try hard to get anything? I mean, I don't know if you've engaged much of the work of the psychologist Jonathan Haidt. He's written a few books, for example, The Coddling of the American Mind. And he talks about how, I'm probably most of my readings around psychology more than business, and I'm interested in the psychology of business in particular, which is how I link those things. But he talks about, he used this expression, reverse CBT. And when I heard that expression, it was like this penny drop moment. Like I've been through therapy. I spent 3 years in therapy, and it was what I would call proper therapy, as in, let's find all the stuff that triggers you and upsets you and move into that. The whole point of therapy is to make you, like MMA, like BJJ, like Muay Thai, like boxing, you need to toughen yourself up. You need to find triggering ideas and you have to immerse yourself in them. And you have to move towards your trauma and desensitize yourself to it. And essentially what a lot of people are doing at the moment, there's this so-called insta therapy, this sort of people who are talking about therapy but actually advocating the complete opposite of any of those principles. And they're teaching young people on university campuses to obsess over their feelings and obsess over their inner thoughts, when we know that is the most guaranteed way to ruin your mental health. And as Jonathan Haidt argued, essentially, universities have become almost the perfect reverse CBT environment, where they're training young people to be more emotionally damaged, to be more stunted, to be more vulnerable. And like trigger warnings, for example, like nobody in the field of psychology actually respects trigger warnings. Life is full of triggers and you're meant to become more resilient to them. So we've got this training program, university campuses, to make young people more incapable of tackling life. And yeah, no surprise, they gravitate towards victimhood-based ideologies.
Yeah, that's that you unpacked quite a bit there. And I just to touch base on trigger warnings, and I feel like the left has taught people to avoid their trigger warnings completely, where they just completely have their guard up without actually going through that mess. Because if you don't go through that mess, then what does it do? Then you're the asshole, because we're supposed to respect everybody's trigger warnings, which is almost impossible. You can't you respect everybody's trigger warnings without actually understanding the human being. And then, you get all these labels thrown at you. And I think that we need to get back into a society where we just live our life, and you have to deal with your inner work. Like, I've dealt with my inner work. I've done my found my inner peace on things that I've gone through in my life. But us, we could be, people could label us as, toxic masculinity type of men. But because we have done the work, you've gone to therapy, I've done my inner work. I haven't gone to therapy, but I've done my inner work on the things that really bother me, and the things that maybe would trigger me. And those things don't trigger me anymore, because I've done that work on myself. Whereas we just kind of hold hands for people to walk them through, and it's like, no, I'm sorry for triggering you. It's like, no, figure out why you're triggered and get back to me, because I'm doing what's best for me and for the greater good of society. And you're basically giving me this fork in a road that I have to detour around you, because you feel uncomfortable and triggered by certain things that you should not be triggered about. And that's my personal opinion anyway. But what I wanted to actually, I want to ask you a question that will lead into our final topic is, where do you see the UK going over the next 5 years? And I'm going to lead in with where I think Canada is going to go in the next 5 years, which will then eventually lead into our final thought topic.
I'm a pretty I'd say I'm a very optimistic person in general, and that's not
Hmm.
natural. It's something I've manufactured, and I think, a risk of segueing again, I think that one of the most important things I've got better at, even the last 6 to 12 months, is recognizing how much happiness and optimism are things we have to manufacture. Most people are waiting for reasons to feel happy, waiting for reasons to feel
Hmm.
optimistic. And I've just started to get better at just making myself feel those things against the odds.
Yeah.
And then you do things that that make that happen. You feel optimistic, you take the chances, and then things work out well for you. So, which is to say, I'm a very optimistic person myself. I think the UK's toast. I think the UK. I don't really waste any time trying. Wouldn't waste any time trying to fix it. My advice to any young people in the UK is just to get out. It's gone beyond the point, the tipping point, in terms of the percentage of people who want to extract from the UK and do not want to contribute, and how many of those people are having lots of kids. The demographics is the elephant in the room. I'm happy to say my friends are all pretty high achievers, pretty high performers, and like, almost none of us have kids. And those of us that do, we're looking at 1, 2 kids max, below the population replacement rate. It's an interesting thing. If I tell you someone has 6 children, you can guess one of two things. If someone has 6 children, they are either fabulously wealthy or unemployed. How many people do you know have 6 kids and have an average income?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's
And
like
it's the same in Canada.
yeah, either I know one of my friends who's got 4 or 5 kids, and he's a multimillionaire, and that's why he's got 4 or 5 kids. One of my friends makes 500,000 a year, and he's just had his tubes tied because he says, I can't afford any more kids. And what he means is, we have a very high quality of life. We get to have a really nice life. We don't want. If we had a third or fourth kid, we'd have to not put them into private school. And of course, you have private school now in the state that things are at. But
Absolutely.
um, yeah, the UK demographics are terminal at this point. There is the people who want to extract and want to take are just going to grow in numbers, and I've never seen anything like the amount of people who make good money in the UK who are leaving. Yes, it's tech entrepreneurs. Tech entrepreneurs, some of my clients who've moved their business from the UK to America, but it's also people on moderate incomes. People earning
Yeah.
anything north of 100,000 US dollars, who are moving to Dubai. Dubai is a big one now, and there will probably be
Yeah.
more places like Dubai spring up. The UK for me is just it's my mum's there. She's safe. She's in a nice little village. She'll be fine. If you're retired in the UK, you've got your money, so you're okay. If you're a young person, just get the hell out. There's no
Yeah.
point trying to fix it. It's done.
Yeah. And I would agree with that too. And the same thing with Canada is I think that, we've gone backwards, so far backwards over the last 9 years of liberal leadership. And if you had asked me that question like 11 years ago in the prime Stephen Harper days of our last conservative government, I would have said Canada was prosperous. Our dollar was more than the United States dollar at that point. Our economy was thriving. The oil industry was booming. Everything was just going very well for Canada. Um, and I would say the same thing, that if you're a young person in Canada, like, find a way to get out, move. I mean, there might not even be a country to go to in the next, 3 years if this whole 51st state, and like, I mean, it is I think it is crocodile, tears, and it's, gaslighting in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of people that are not going to shy away from that. There's a lot of people that are fighting for it. And it's interesting that a lot of people are now all of a sudden very patriotic Canadians, and certain groups of people are coming together as Canadians, which I'll be honest, I disagree with. It's like our government has put us in this position because we don't trade with anybody else but the United States, and we have the most resources, and we have never used our resources for the greater good of our own citizens. We've always shipped them away pennies on the dollar, and we get them back. We buy the resources that are exported away back into the actual goods at a higher price. And we have, like I said, the most resources in the world, from lumber to fresh water to energy to gold, minerals, you name it. We have an abundance of it, and we should be a powerhouse country in the world. We could have the resources to become like a Dubai. We just don't have the manpower to do so, and that's why we are in the situation that we are in, because of poor leadership. And I don't have any hope in a lot of ways of what's going to happen with Canada. I think we've gone so far backwards, and we've created a crisis in our real estate market. And if our real estate market crashes, um, I think a lot of people's investments are tied into real estate in Canada, and I think it's going to break us. I really do. So I think a lot of people and young people can then decide whether they want to make a difference for themselves in their own career, which obviously leads us into, our last point here, which is patriotism versus personal prosperity. Because a lot of people that I talk to, they ask me the question, like, don't you want to fight? Because I speak pretty out there in terms of like what's happening in Canada versus the US, and I know you do with regards to the UK. But a lot of people ask, like, don't you want to be part of the solution and not the problem? And like, you're gonna leave and not fight. It's like, you know, should I stay and fight for my country, or should I leave and create myself a better life for my wife and my future kids, that I can set them up for success, instead of having to say, waste all this time, stress, and effort and financial, and a financial stress of trying to benefit Canada and try to get Canada back to where it was in the glory days? Or do I say, see you later, I'll come home for visits, obviously my family's there, but I need to create a better life for myself somewhere else? So I mean, that's the biggest question, is like, how do you decide what's better for you, and and fight for what your forefathers fought for in the world wars, and for our freedom?
Yeah, much to unpack. And the first thing I'd say is that I think that, despite what I said in my previous post, I think if you wanted to live in Canada, or you wanted to live in the UK, look, and Canada is interesting to me because I love winter sports. But if I was to move to Canada, I would move to Canada because I had quite a few million in the bank. You could live in most countries with, if you have a much higher income, you can afford to live in very prosperous areas. Ironically, I think if you really cared about life in Canada or life in the UK, go and move abroad, build your career up, build an online business somewhere, then move back. If I move
Yeah.
back to the, put it this way, I'm 39. I left the UK at 32. I make a lot more money at 39 living abroad than I would have done if I'd stayed there. If I wanted to move back to the UK, which I don't, I'll be far better off financially because I built an online business somewhere else. And, the whole thing about learning how to work for yourself, learning how to build a business, that's hard to do it, first of all, in a country that has a very high cost of living. UK, Canada aren't particularly entrepreneurial places. So even if you do feel patriotic, I wouldn't underestimate the value of going and, I mean, first of all, traveling, living abroad, having the experience of visiting a lot of different countries. You'll understand even if you're a patriot, you'll understand your own country much better for having lived in a bunch of other countries. I understand the UK much better because I've lived abroad. And the things I do like about the UK, I can appreciate more from having been away. So I kind of think if you're in your 20s or 30s, just moving abroad anyway is almost always a net positive, even if you come back. But to answer your question
Yeah.
more directly, I think the world's moved on a certain amount. I obviously have a huge amount of appreciation and respect for the people who fought in those wars to defend our countries, but they also fought for ideals and values as much as countries. And when our own administrations no longer stand for those ideals and values, like, obviously World War II is a very just war. I would absolutely stand by that. When we look at, people talk about the Ukraine war, for example, and are you a patriot or are you not a patriot if you don't want to fight there? And it's like, that's a completely different situation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the values of our administrations have shifted so much now and is so non-representative of the general population. The idea of a UK politician telling me to go and shed blood in a foreign country doesn't quite have the same level of impact that it did 50 or 60 years ago. I don't view this person as being in any way reflective of me, my values. And we live in a more international community as well now. And I meet plenty of people like yourself from different countries to my own who I feel more of a connection to than a lot of people from my own country who I think are a lot of the time just weak, just very weak, soft people who've experienced no hardship. And I want to build constructive things. I want to make things. I want to contribute to the technology sector. And I want to do that with people of all nationalities. I basically want to find and be part of a community of builders, of people who make things. I don't feel that necessarily happens as much on a national level now, so much as you go and find your community or tribe of people somewhere else. You might find them somewhere like Thailand, for example. Ultimately, I would like to contribute to a specific economy at some point. I'm not sure where that one is, but to me, what the UK stands for and represents has really got little in common with things that my grandfather fought for back in the Second World War. We've drifted so far from that today. And I look at, the last war we had in the UK was the Afghanistan war. I don't want to kind of dwell on that too much, but someone very close to me fought there and was shot and is okay, luckily. But I had to see that person witness the fall of Afghanistan, knowing what they had contributed, knowing a lot of their friends didn't come back. That was the last war we had, and we now know that war was completely pointless. And I just have so little faith and respect in the leaders that we have. So yeah, I want to contribute, but I just don't see the UK as being a good base to do that now.
Yeah, and I agree. And I would say the same thing with Canada as well, that there's not a lot to fight for because I don't even know if you even have a say anymore. Like it's there, like when we can have unelected leaders come in and make decisions um and yeah, I don't know. I just find that there's other things that you should be worrying about, and that is ultimately taking care of yourself the best that you possibly can. Um, and it's challenge. It's tough when I see a lot of people. All they're talking about right now is back home is talking about Trump's tariffs and all this stuff. And I mean, I talk about this, and I actually just posted. I did a podcast episode on this about a few weeks ago about why Trump's tariffs don't affect me, because they don't, because I'm in Vietnam right now. I still make Western world money and nothing is affecting me. As long as if the Canadian dollar stays where it's at, even if it goes down, the cost of living is so low here in Vietnam that it doesn't matter what that does. Now, do I agree with Trump's what he's doing? Not necessarily, but I also think that the US have also has been ripped off in terms of trade with Canada for years, because they basically subsidize Canada's trade, because Canada has relied solely on the US for trade, and Canada trades more with the US than we do with ourselves. So for an example, if instead of buying fruits and vegetables from British Columbia, which is on the other side of the country, Quebec will buy their fruits and vegetables from the US instead of buying it from our own country. So we don't trade amongst our own country, which has left us in this massive hole. Now, I think Canada's done this to themselves. And I think that if things are really going to change, Canada needs to take care of our own country first. And I don't see that happening. I think that we are destined to go down this path. And we'll see if Canada can make it on the other side. But at the end of the day, it's, I'm not going to sit here and worry about it because I've created this life for myself, this business for myself, where I can help people who have the similar thoughts as me, just like educate and train other people or mentor other people to find, skill sets within themselves. It's exactly what I do as a recruiter and a business coach and a career coach, is that let's change things so you don't have to rely on a job market, and you can create your own work and get online and create your own lifestyle where you don't have to rely on what's happening within our own borders of our country, and you can go live anywhere you want. You can set your business up wherever you want, whether that's Dubai, Panama, Paraguay, the United States, wherever. You can live a tax-free life and figure a way out to kind of make yourself the best version possible and live the most, I wouldn't say cost effective life, but where you actually still contribute and you don't have to worry about all the nonsense that's going on in your own country, if that makes sense.
I think another factor as well is, to go back to a conversation earlier on, is the need for consequences. And I use the expression
Yes.
feedback loop. So whatever you're doing in life, if you're studying a martial art, if you're studying business, if you're in a relationship, you need a feedback loop. You get feedback from your partner, you get feedback from your coach to help you do something better. And our governments need a feedback loop. And if the UK or Canada are going to turn their fortunes around, they need to acknowledge that their best and their brightest can and will and already are leaving. And the sort of a shift in remote work is obviously affecting, if you look at most of the countries that have moved to recruit remote workers and remote talent, they've naturally been smaller economies. Places like Estonia, places like Thailand, where we represent a bigger uptick. And obviously more prosperous, bigger economies, we are, in proportionate terms, we have a smaller impact. But you start to see, the UK's lost 3 billion now, they estimate a year for remote workers. I'd like to see that number go up. I want to see that number go up. We should have politicians in the Western world going to bed at night worrying about losing talent. That is the world we should live in. Our leaders should worry about their entrepreneurs, their high earners leaving. In the same way that a business owner should worry about losing their customers. You imagine running a business knowing you have a monopoly. We know that monopolies in business are a terrible thing. The whole point of capitalism is you have competition. Without competition, obviously, you get a complete stagnation in terms of service innovation and efficiency. And governments have just got so used to having a monopoly on their citizens. We can screw over, abuse, and extract wealth from our citizens as much as we want. And the most wonderful thing that's come out of remote work is the fact that ordinary people now realize we're consumers. We consume government services, and you and I are free to go and find another government. We say, you know what, Canadian, the UK government is not a good service provider, and I want to find another. And at the moment, we are not a sufficient volume to enact social change, but that volume is growing and it will continue to grow. And, we get to vote within a system, but far better is the ability to just withdraw yourself from the system. So if the UK and Canada realize that they need to start worrying about losing talent and recruiting foreign talent, then things could pick up, but they need to have that pain point first. So I would say in some senses, people like you and me, people who are net contributors, withdrawing from our systems and taking our tax revenue away, we're actually helping. We're giving feedback. We're teaching these governments, you cannot behave like this. You cannot tax high earners and builders and people who get the shit done without consequence.
I agree. And the thing that I agree with the most on that is that we're taxing the people that are actually bringing jobs to the country.
Yeah.
Like you're taxing people more you're taxing people instead of rewarding people. If a company adds 1,000 jobs into the country per year, and you're going to tax them more because they've made more revenue. They have brought you 1,000 more jobs to your economy. That should be rewarded instead of taxed, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I think that is, and that's why you've seen companies move their headquarters and move their companies outside of countries who are doing that exact thing and taxing them more. And that's happening in Canada. And I mean, whatever we think about what Trump's doing with his tariffs and everything, I'm curious to see how that plays out. I don't have enough knowledge on it yet. I think that it's still pretty raw. I have my opinions, but I don't want to speak too much on that because I could be definitely pulling my foot out of my mouth rather quickly. Um, and it is going to be interesting to see what happens with those tariffs and his little trade wars that he's having with all these other countries, Canada included, Mexico, China, everybody, it seems. So it is going to be interesting. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, the worst case scenario I think is Canada and the U.S. and Mexico and possibly all of the Americas create a European Union type of environment. Do I agree with it? My biggest concern is I do not want to become an American because I don't want to be a citizenship based tax system where then I have to pay taxes no matter in the world where in the world I live. I think that because of what I'm doing, I want to be a global citizen where if I want to set up my business or my tax residency in another country, then I can pick and choose where I pay taxes. So, or if I pay taxes, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I think that we've uncovered a lot here, and I think this has been a really good follow up to our last episode, and I think that these conversations are what people are afraid to have. I think people are really afraid to have these conversations, and I mean, I know that you don't agree with everything that I say, and but I think that we've got so much common ground of what we want to do and what we want to accomplish and the viewpoints that we have. I think that there's so much similarities, and I think that people will resonate with this because I think people are scared. I think people are seeing that their paychecks are not going up, but their cost of living is going up, and we need to find a way to they need to find a way to help to get into our minds and our way of living, and they need to know that they just need to start something and start creating those skills for themselves and start developing something and getting to the online world because now's the time because we don't know what 5 years holds. We don't know what 10 years holds. And it could, our Western world could look very differently. And you can give yourself the power to live wherever you want and find that nation that is going to really drive what you want for yourself and for your family. And you touched on Dubai as being a major hotspot for families. And I totally agree because it's safe. There's a lot of safety there. Is it expensive? Yes. But if you get yourself working in as a contractor or a freelancer in a specified field that is going to drive the economy, whether that's in AI or automation, marketing, anything that is going to be an innovative type of skill set, you then set yourself apart from the pack to give yourself that opportunity to go live in those places. And, Thailand's not a bad option either. Bangkok is also another thriving economy. Um, and yeah, Alex, I think this has been really good. And so I just want to give you the floor again to just tell our audience where they can connect with you if they how they can maybe even reach out to you for mentorship if they are interested in doing what you do as well.
Yeah, sure. You could just check out my main homepage, which is alexnapierholland.com. So you got links to me on Twitter is where I'm most active. That's where I post most of the time. Mixture of marketing tips, but occasionally bitching about the UK economy as well. And then I do paid mentor sessions as well at alexnapierholland.com for young people who are looking for career advice. Help quite a few young marketers to get hired, to figure out the skills or qualities they need in order to get hired in what is a pretty tough and competitive marketplace. So the moment they are $47 for 15 minutes. So any young people are welcome to ping me messages and questions are free. And if they want to book a quick session with me, you can do that via my website too, alexnapierholland.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Alex. I appreciate this, and I'm excited to see the results of the conversation that we've had. And I hope that people will start to listen and realize that it's not too late. It's never too late. But time might be ticking depending on how you look at things. So it's not too late to make that change for yourself. And if you're looking for a free resource, everybody, I just launched my my first free course, which is Mindset to Momentum. It's a 3-module mini series that's going to take you through a mindset journey to get yourself in that entrepreneur mind, to learn new skills, especially if you've been stuck in a career that maybe a little bit dead end over the last few years. And this is just going to help you get into that entrepreneur brain. And then you're going to go through a skills assessment. And then I've also listed the top 10 online service-based businesses that are out there that are thriving in the past year, in 2024 and now 2025. And you can align yourself and figure out what it is that you are passionate about, what you're good at, and where you can fill in the gaps to learn those new skills. So check it out. The link is also below. We can start those conversations, and we can move the needle. And like I said, Alex, I'm super happy that you're also doing mentoring and helping people, because I think more people like us will then create a better society for those who are looking for that escape, and we can then look and try to build our countries back from one step at a time.
Awesome.
So thank you, everybody. I appreciate you guys. Be brave, be bold. Thank you, Alex, and we'll see you on the road.
Thanks for having me.